The signal arrived at 3:14 in the morning, Earth Standard Time. It came from deep space, from a direction that most humans had never even looked at on a star map. The people who first picked it up were two tired radio operators at a listening station in the Atacama Desert of Chile. They thought it was a glitch at first. Then they ran it through the translation filters, and the room went very quiet. The message was short. It said, "We are what remains. Our world is gone. We are 40,000 souls in broken ships. We do not ask for much. We only ask if there is room." The signal was from the Cathari. Most humans had heard the name only once or twice in passing, in dry galactic briefings that nobody really paid attention to. The Cathari were a species from a star system called Veth, about 200 light-years from Earth. They were beetle-like in appearance, with hard shells that shifted color depending on their mood, and 6 limbs, 2 of which they used as hands. They were quiet people, scholars, artists. They had no great army, no powerful fleet, no political weight in the Galactic Assembly. They were, in the language of interstellar politics, small. And now they had nothing at all. The Vorath Dominion had come to their system 8 months ago. The Vorath were not unknown. Every species in the known galaxy understood what it meant when a Vorath fleet appeared in your sky. The Dominion did not negotiate. It did not offer terms. It came, it took, and it left behind only silence. The Cathari had resisted as long as they could, which was not long. Their ships were built for science and travel, not war. Their planet, Veth, burned in less than 3 weeks. What escaped were fragments. Families packed into cargo ships and science vessels and old transport barges, pushing their engines past their limits, running in whatever direction was away. 40,000 people, not the population of a city, but all that was left of an entire world. They drifted for months, rationing food and water, fixing engines with tools that were not made for the job, watching their numbers slowly fall. Then someone on one of those ships made the decision to send a message toward a small blue planet that the Galactic Assembly had classified as developing. A planet whose species was new to space travel, still figuring out its place among the stars, not powerful enough to threaten anyone, and not rich enough to matter. Someone thought, perhaps a small planet will be kinder. Director Amara Osei received the translated signal at 4:02 in the morning. She was the head of Earth's Office of Galactic Affairs, a small department that most people in government thought was a waste of money. She was 53 years old, born in Accra, Ghana, and she had spent 20 years watching humanity try to figure out what it was doing among the stars. She had a reputation for being calm. Her colleagues sometimes said she was too calm. Her enemies said she had no feelings. She read the message twice. Then she picked up her communication device and started making calls. Her first call was to the chief of the Global Coordination Council. He was not pleased to be woken at that hour. She told him what the signal said. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "How many?" he asked. 40,000, she said. Another silence. "And what does the Assembly expect us to do?" Director Osei had already checked. The Galactic Assembly had sent a note, very polite, very diplomatic, saying that Earth was under no obligation and that most mature galactic nations had protocols for these situations, which usually meant a temporary holding facility in an uninhabited system, basic rations, and a long wait while bureaucrats argued about resettlement. The note also mentioned gently that the Vorath Dominion was watching the situation closely. She did not tell the council chief about the Vorath note yet. Instead, she said, "I think we should take them in." The silence this time was longer. "Amara," he said, in the voice of a man choosing his words carefully, "we are talking about 40,000 beings from a species we have never hosted, with biology we barely understand, on ships that are apparently falling apart. We don't have facilities. We don't have protocols. The Assembly will say we're overreaching. The Vorath will—" "I know what the Vorath will say," she said. "Then why? Because someone has to, she said. Her voice was quiet, not angry, just certain. And because we can. Not perfectly, not easily, but we can. That has to be enough to start. She spent the rest of the night on calls. By sunrise, she had spoken to the heads of 7 national governments, the directors of 3 global engineering collectives, the chief medical liaison for alien biology at the Geneva Institute, and a man named Prakash, who ran the largest rapid deployment construction company on Earth, and who owed her a favor. By 8 in the morning she stood in front of the council and spoke for 11 minutes without notes. She told them what she wanted to do. She told them how she thought it could be done. She told them what it would cost, and what it would risk, and what it would say about Earth to every watching eye in the galaxy. There were questions. There were arguments. 2 council members walked out of the room and then came back in. One man said it was impossible. Osei said the word impossible was not in the budget. At 10:43 in the morning, the council voted. 14 votes in favor, 3 abstentions, 0 against. The message that went back into space that afternoon was short, like the one that had come in. It said, "We have room. Come toward the blue planet. You are welcome." Far out in the dark between the stars, on a crumbling barge that smelled of recycled air and fear, a Cathari elder named Javel read the translation 3 times. The shell on her back, which had been gray for months, the Cathari color of grief, shifted slowly, uncertainly, toward a pale yellow. The color they showed when they dared, very carefully, to feel something like hope. The Galactic Assembly observer, a tall gray-skinned diplomat named Esovan, had seen many things in his 40 years of service. He had watched species go to war over half a moon. He had watched civilizations collapse in slow motion over centuries. He had sat in rooms where the fate of millions was decided with the calm efficiency of accountants reviewing a spreadsheet. He thought he had seen everything. He had not seen anything like this. He stood at the edge of a vast flat plain in what humans called Central Asia, watching machines move across the earth with a speed that made no sense to him. Great yellow machines that dug and leveled and laid ground in hours. Convoys of vehicles arriving in clouds of dust, packed with materials he did not recognize. Hundreds of workers who did not stop, who worked in shifts through the night under bright lights, who communicated constantly through small devices in their ears, who moved with a shared purpose that looked almost like a single organism thinking. This had started 48 hours ago. "This is not possible," Esovan said to Director Osei, who was standing beside him drinking something hot from a metal cup. "And yet," she said, "you do not have a template for alien housing. You have never hosted a non-human species on this scale. You do not know the Cathari's biological requirements in sufficient detail. We know enough," Osei said. "The rest we are learning in real time. Dr. Mwangi's team at Geneva has been talking directly to the Cathari ships. They have been sending us everything. Atmospheric needs, temperature range, light sensitivity, dietary basics. We have been building to that data as it comes in." Esovan looked at the plane again. He could already see the shapes of structures rising. Low, wide buildings with curved roofs. Between them open spaces, pathways. Something that looked like it might become a garden. It was not quite a question. "No," said Osei. "The Assembly recommendation for emergency refugee housing is a containment and provision model. Basic shelter, food distribution points, medical screening stations. You hold them there while resettlement is arranged. It is standard practice." "I know what the standard practice is," Osei said. "We are not doing that." "Why not?" She looked at him for a moment. "Because they have already lost everything. We are not going to make them feel like they are being processed." The Cathari fleet arrived in 3 waves over the course of 4 days. 41 ships in total, ranging from a large colony transport that had once been a research vessel to a collection of small craft that should not have survived the journey at all. Some of them came in trailing smoke and sparks. One ship lost engine function in the outer system, and had to be guided in by a human tug team that had never towed an alien vessel before, and did it anyway, cheerfully, with a lot of improvised cable and a great deal of communication through a translation system that kept crashing and restarting. The Cathari who stepped off those ships, or were carried off, or crawled off, were in terrible shape. Months of poor food and recycled air, and constant fear had worn them down to something fragile. Their shells, which should have been bright with color, were dull and flat. Many were sick. Some had injuries that had not been properly treated. Children, small, wide-eyed creatures who clutched their parents with 4 limbs at once, looked at everything around them with expressions that the human medical teams quickly learned to read as profound exhaustion mixed with disbelief. They had not expected this. They had expected a field, some tents, perhaps a fence. They had been told they were going to the camp. Every refugee species in the galaxy went to a camp. That was the word, universal and gray, that meant you had survived, but you had not yet arrived anywhere. Instead, they found streets. Not finished streets, not polished and perfect, but real streets with real buildings on them. Buildings that were the right temperature, that had the right kind of light inside, that smelled of nothing threatening, that had doors their hands could open. They found kitchens with food prepared from the dietary guides the doctors had sent. They found medical stations staffed by human doctors who had been studying Cathari anatomy for 72 hours straight and were still learning, but who came to them with clean hands and calm voices and no fear. They found, in the central square of the new settlement, a wall. On the wall, painted by a team of human artists who had worked through 2 nights, were images. Stars, the shape of a world that none of them had drawn, but that any Cathari would recognize. Veth, their lost planet, painted in the colors that the Cathari themselves used to paint it. Colors that the human artists had found in old Cathari broadcasts and digital archives. Below the painting, in the Cathari script, were 4 words that a linguist named Tomas had spent 18 hours getting exactly right. The words meant, "You are not forgotten." Elder Javel stood in front of that wall for a long time. She was old, and she had seen her world die, and she had crossed the dark between stars in a broken ship, with grief sitting on her chest like a stone. She stood there, and she looked at the image of Veth, and the shell on her back moved through 5 different colors in the space of 3 minutes, which the human doctors watching from a respectful distance had learned meant something close to what humans called being overwhelmed. Van filed his report to the Galactic Assembly that evening. He was a careful diplomat, and he chose his words with precision. He wrote that Earth had responded to the Cathari arrival with what he could only classify as an anomalous level of preparation and commitment. He wrote that the housing being constructed exceeded all standard refugee provision benchmarks. He wrote that human medical personnel appeared to be working without rest and without complaint. Then he sat for a moment and added one more line, which was not standard for an assembly report, but which he felt was necessary. He wrote, "I am not sure we have properly classified this species." The Vorath Dominion's message arrived 7 days after the Cathari ships landed. It was addressed to Earth's Global Coordination Council, and it was not polite. The Dominion did not usually bother with politeness. Their messages were short and direct, and they said exactly what they meant, which was one of the few things about the Vorath that other species found almost respectable. The message said that the Cathari were classified as displaced former subjects of the Dominion. It said that harboring them without Dominion authorization was a violation of Galactic Assembly Treaty Code, Section 7, Subsection 12, which nobody had ever actually read. It said that Earth would face trade sanctions and diplomatic isolation if it did not immediately transfer the Cathari to an approved Dominion-supervised relocation facility. It did not say what happened to species in those facilities. It did not have to. Everyone knew. Director Osei read the message at her desk and set it face down and left it there. She sent a 2-line reply that said Earth had received the communication and was reviewing its options. This was a diplomatic way of saying nothing while sounding like something. She was buying time. Inside Earth, the reaction was complicated. Most people supported what Osei had done. They had seen the images coming out of the settlement. The tired alien children eating real food for the first time in months. The medical teams working around the clock. The wall with the painting of death. And they felt something that people across many cultures recognized as the basic human instinct to help someone who has nothing. It did not need to be explained. It just felt right. But not everyone felt that way. There were voices, loud ones, who said that Earth was too young and too poor to be taking on the problems of the galaxy. Who said that 40,000 aliens were a burden that human taxpayers should not have to carry. Who said that the Vorath were not their enemy, and that picking a fight with the most powerful military force in the sector over a species that had nothing to offer was not strategy, it was sentiment. Some of these voices were on the council. 3 members who had abstained from the original vote were now making speeches. There were protests in 4 cities. A news commentator with a large following called the whole operation an expensive act of galactic naivety. The word naivety came up a great deal. Osei did not respond to any of it directly. She kept working. Meanwhile, in the settlement that the Kethari had quietly started calling the Blue Place, because of the color of the sky, which they had never seen in quite that shade before, Elder Zavel was getting stronger. The doctors had treated her lungs, which had been damaged by months of recycled air, and the food had helped, and the sleep in a bed that was the right temperature had helped more. She had begun to walk through the settlement every morning, slowly, observing. She observed many things. She saw humans argue with each other in the street, and then sit together for a meal an hour later. She saw a young human child run up to a young Kethari child and offer a small colored object. A toy, it turned out, and the 2 of them spend the next hour doing something that looked like a game, in a language neither of them had. She watched a human doctor sit on the ground next to a very old Kethari man who could not stop shaking, and hold his hand, 2 fingers to 6, which was wrong in every anatomical sense, for 40 minutes without moving. She wanted to understand. Not the logistics, not the construction, not the supplies. She understood those. She wanted to understand the reason. She asked to meet with Director Osei, and Osei came to her. She did not send an aide. She came herself, on a Tuesday afternoon, and sat across from the elder, in a room that smelled of the herb tea that the Kethari had brought with them from their ships, and that the humans had been trying to figure out how to grow from the seeds they carried. Zavel asked the question directly, because the Kethari did not believe in taking the long way to a question. Why? She said. You are a young species. You have little to spare. The Dominion threatens you. Your own people argue against this. You gain nothing from us. We have no army, no resources, no political value. We cannot repay you. So I ask you sincerely, Director, why did you do this? Osei was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just thinking. Then she said, I had a grandmother. She came from a family that lost everything. War, displacement, nothing left. She was taken in by strangers who had very little themselves. She always said that what those strangers did was not logical. It was not profitable. It was not safe. But they did it because they saw a person in front of them who needed help. She said that when you see someone drowning, you do not first check if saving them will benefit you. You jump. Javel's shell shifted color slowly. But your people are not all like that. Many of them are angry. Yes, Osei said. We argue. We are loud and messy and we do not all agree. That is true. But the decision was made, and it will not be undone. People can be angry about it. That is their right. But we do not abandon people because some of us are uncomfortable. The elder was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that her translator struggled with for a moment before it rendered into English. The closest it could get was, You are a very strange people. We know, said Osei, and there was something in her expression that the elder could not quite read, but which she later described to a fellow elder as the look of someone who has made peace with being misunderstood. Outside the window, in the settlement, a group of Kethari young people were watching a human engineer repair a solar panel on a roof. The engineer noticed them watching and called down asking if they wanted to come up and see. Two of them climbed the ladder. By the end of the afternoon, they were both helping, their shell colors bright with something the doctors had already learned to classify as curiosity. That evening, Javel sat alone and thought about the question she had asked, and the answer she had been given. Something about alliances, or strategy, or the future of interstellar relations. She had not expected a grandmother. She thought for a long time. Then she did something that no Kethari elder had done in the 8 long months since Veth burned. She gathered the other elders in the settlement, all 11 of them. And she told them what the human had said. She told them about the grandmother and the strangers and the drowning. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Then one of the younger elders, a man named Vetan who had been a scientist before the war, said, "Then perhaps we should stop acting like we are drowning, and start acting like we have been pulled from the water." The fleet appeared on long-range scanners on a Thursday morning. 12 ships, Vorath design, which any sensor operator in the galaxy would recognize. Angular and dark, built without any curve that was not there for a military purpose. They came in slowly, which was the Vorath way of making a point. A fast approach was aggression. A slow approach was contempt. They were saying, "We are in no hurry. We are not afraid. We know you cannot stop us." General Su-Yun Park, of Earth's Orbital Defense Division, stared at the incoming formation on her display, and felt something cold settle in her stomach. Earth had orbital platforms. It had a small fleet of defense ships, fast and maneuverable, and built for intercepting debris and the occasional hostile probe. It was not built to fight 12 Vorath war cruisers. She called Director Osei. "I see them," Osei said. She was already at the command center. "They have not fired," Park said. "They are broadcasting on open channels. They want everyone to hear this." "Of course they do," Osei said. "What are they saying?" The Vorath broadcast was formal and precise. It acknowledged Earth as a developing signatory nation. It referred to the Kethari as unregistered displaced subjects of the Dominion, currently in unauthorized residency on Earth territory. It gave Earth 24 hours to prepare the Kethari for transfer to a Dominion vessel. It said this was not a negotiation. It was being broadcast to every receiver in the sector. The Galactic Assembly, which had been watching the situation with what Osei privately called concerned cowardice, issued a statement, urging all parties to seek a diplomatic resolution. This meant nothing, and everyone knew it. In the settlement, the Kethari received the broadcast at the same time as everyone else. The translation came through clearly. 40,000 people heard it. There was a long and terrible silence in the settlement, the kind of silence that comes from a people who recognize the sound of the thing that took everything from them, coming again. Then something unexpected happened. Vetan, the young scientist elder who had spoken at the gathering 3 weeks before, walked to the community building in the center of the settlement and stood outside it and spoke in a loud voice. He said that the Vorath had taken their world. He said that the Vorath had taken their families and their history and their home. He said that the Vorath had expected them to disappear quietly, to go to a facility and vanish and never be spoken of again. "They did not expect us to find this place," he said. "They did not expect people who would jump." He paused. "I am not a soldier. I am a scientist. But I am standing on ground that was given to us by people who asked nothing in return, and I am not willing to be taken from it." By the end of the day, over 800 Kethari had walked to the human coordination offices and asked how they could help. Director Osei and General Park spent the night in the command center. They had 24 hours. They could not fight 12 Vorath cruisers in open space. What they had was something different. They had infrastructure. They had the entire communications grid of Earth. They had 40,000 Cathari who knew every weakness in Vorath's ship design because they had been on the receiving end of it for months and had studied it the way only survivors study the thing that tried to kill them. Veytan sat in the technical planning session and described Vorath's sensor arrays in precise detail. 3 Cathari engineers who had worked on ship systems outlined exactly how Vorath long-range communications could be disrupted. A Cathari woman named HFY, who had been a defensive systems analyst before the war, drew on a board for 2 hours while human engineers asked her questions and built from her answers. The plan that emerged was not a battle plan. It was something more complicated. When the 24 hours were up, Earth did not fire on the Vorath fleet. It did not surrender the Cathari. Instead, every major communications platform on Earth and in Earth's orbital network began broadcasting simultaneously. News channels, science channels, cultural feeds, everything. It broadcast the full documented history of what the Vorath had done to Veth. Not a summary, not a statement, the complete record. Medical reports, survivor testimonies, images of what the Vorath had left behind. All of it, in 43 languages, including the primary languages of every species that had a receiver pointed anywhere near this sector. At the same time, the Cathari engineers, working with human communications teams, activated a signal pattern that HFY had designed. It did not destroy the Vorath ships. It reflected their own targeting signals back at them, in a loop that made their sensor arrays see phantom objects, dozens of them, appearing and vanishing, impossible to lock onto. It was not a weapon, it was a mirror, and it bought time. The Vorath commander was not stupid. He understood what was happening. He understood that Earth was not fighting back. It was performing. It was making the entire galaxy watch. He held his position. He did not fire. He had been given authority to intimidate. He had not been given authority to massacre a planet in front of every receiver in the sector, while an exhaustive record of the last massacre played on every channel. The Dominion was powerful. It was not stupid. Some things, done in the open, in front of everyone, cost more than they gain. He sent a message back to Dominion Command. He waited. In the settlement, Elder Javel stood outside in the evening air and looked at the sky. A human named Riku, one of the construction engineers who had been in the settlement since the first day, stood beside her. They had developed the habit of standing together in the evenings without saying much. He was just a man who had helped build their streets, and now felt, in some quiet way, that this was his neighborhood too. "Are you frightened?" he asked. The elder's shell showed a color he had learned to read as something between yes and it does not change what I will do. "Yes," she said, "but I have been frightened before. Frightened and lost. This is different. This time I know where I am standing." He nodded, and they both looked at the sky, and they waited. The Vorath fleet turned around on a Saturday. They did not announce it. They did not broadcast a formal withdrawal. The 12 ships simply began to move, slowly, back the way they had come. The Vorath commander filed a report that described the situation as unresolved pending further Dominion review. This was the diplomatic language of retreat, without admitting retreat. On Earth, there was no celebration. Director Osei watched the fleet's departure on the command center display and felt the tension drain out of her shoulders, which she had not realized were up around her ears. General Park made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a laugh. The room was quiet for a moment, and then everyone went back to work, because the work was not finished. In the settlement, the news moved through the streets quickly. The reaction was not cheers. It was quieter than that. People stood still for a moment. Some held each other. A group of Cathari elders sat in a circle, and their shells moved through slow, deep colors. Colors the humans had learned to recognize as solemn and grateful and very tired. Elder Javel sat in the morning light outside her door and closed her eyes and breathed the cool air of a planet that was not her home, but that had not let her be taken. The galaxy, which had been watching all of this, did not react with silence. Every species that had a receiver had seen the broadcasts. They had seen the history of Veth. They had seen the Vorath fleet arrive and stand, and then slowly, without firing, turn back. They had seen 40,000 refugees greeted with buildings instead of fences, with doctors instead of guards, with a painting of their lost world, and words that said they were not forgotten. The messages began arriving within days. Some were formal, from governments and councils, carefully worded, inquiring about Earth's diplomatic posture regarding displaced species, and whether Earth had frameworks for interstellar cooperation in humanitarian matters. These were the messages from species who were interested, but cautious, who wanted to understand what Earth was before they committed to anything. Osei's office answered each one with equal care. They came in on open frequencies, in languages that took the translation systems a while to process. A species called the Mahari, who lived under the constant threat of a neighbor almost as powerful as the Vorath, sent a message that said only, "We watched. We want to know if this is really who you are." A small collective of water-dwelling beings from the edge of the sector sent a message that contained no words at all, only a sound, a particular frequency that xenolinguists spent 2 weeks analyzing before concluding it was the closest thing their species had to the concept of relief. And some messages were personal. They came from individuals, not governments. A Kethari named Hasal, who was living in the settlement and who had been a teacher before the war, wrote a long letter to Director Osei that the translation system rendered imperfectly, but which was clearly an expression of something very close to love. Not romantic love, but the kind of love that a person feels towards something that restored their belief in the world. Osei read it 3 times and then put it in the drawer of her desk, where she kept the things she did not want to lose. The Galactic Assembly convened an emergency session. This was, on one level, exactly what assembly emergency sessions always were. A great deal of talk from a great deal of species who all had different interests and different fears and different definitions of what had just happened. But something was different this time. The usual voices that spoke in favor of the Vorath Dominion's interests were quieter. The species who had long stayed silent on the subject of Dominion aggression spoke more than they usually did. Esovan presented his full report to the assembly. He stood at the podium for 40 minutes and spoke carefully and without drama in the way he always spoke. He described the construction of the settlement. He described the medical programs, the schools that were being built, the system by which Kethari engineers were already working alongside human engineers on settlement infrastructure. He described the night of the Vorat fleet and what Earth had done and what it had not done. He described the result. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then a representative from a species called the Orin, who had not spoken at an assembly session in 11 years, raised her hand to be recognized, and said, "I think we need to revise our threat assessment of Earth." There was some confusion about what she meant. She clarified, "I do not mean they are dangerous in the way the Vorath are dangerous. I mean they are dangerous in the way that true things are dangerous. They make the rest of us uncomfortable because they keep doing the thing that we know we should do and have been finding reasons not to." Nobody argued with that. In the months that followed, the settlement grew. More buildings went up. A Kethari school opened, taught partly in Kethari and partly in 3 human languages that the children were absorbing with the specific speed and ease that children have when they are not afraid. A market appeared in the central square, where Kethari craftwork sat alongside human food and goods, and people from both species stopped and looked, and occasionally bought things, and occasionally stood and talked, imperfectly, with translation devices that always lagged slightly behind, but that everyone was patient about. The question of permanent residency was discussed openly in Earth's councils. The same voices that had opposed the arrival spoke again. But they were somewhat quieter now, because the settlement was real and visible and functioning, and because the humans who had built it and worked in it and lived beside it were coming back with different things to say than anyone had expected. The council voted on the question of formal permanent residency for the Kethari of Earth. It was not unanimous. It was never going to be unanimous, but it passed. Elder Javel heard the result in the community hall, surrounded by her people. She was 62 years old, and she had survived the death of her world, and months of cold dark space, and the shadow of a Vorov fleet. She sat very still when the announcement was read, and her shell turned a color that no human in the room had seen before. The doctors checked their notes and could not find it. Riku, the construction engineer who had become her quiet neighbor, leaned over and asked softly what color it was. "In our language," she said, "it has no simple name. It is the color of a thing that was lost and has been returned, but different, changed, still good." He nodded. He understood that feeling, even if his own skin was a single, constant color that gave nothing away. Director Osei was not in the hall when the announcement was read. She was at her desk, answering messages. There were many messages. There were always many messages now. She read each one and answered each one, and then came to the one from Hasol, the teacher, which was not about politics or logistics or the assembly. It was a simple message. It said, "We have decided to stay. We have decided to plant the herb from our ships in your soil, and see if it will grow. It might not. The soil is different. But we think it is worth trying." Osei read that message and was quiet for a long time. Then she wrote back and said, "We have room." She sent it and went back to work. And outside her window the sun was setting over a planet that was, quietly, becoming something slightly more than it had been before.